Super Jive, everybody, with Earl Father Hines. Welcome to Mysterious Chicago After Hours. Welcome along, everybody. Hey, Mona.
What could this be? It's a Limehouse Blues.
Evening, Kurt and Marcia. Welcome along once again. Hey, Mandy. Mandy Crypt is in the house, everybody, from effing Chicago. Chris, I hope you got some spare batteries. I wouldn't want your battery to go out on my account. Hey, Mary. Hey, Bart. Hey, Sarah. Hope the new place is working out well. Hey, John. Smut! Give me smut and nothing but a dirty novel I can't shut if it is swell and really filthy. Hey, Lee. Hey, Betty. Hey, Ava. Hey, Michelle and Rodney. I got my drink. This is a Jepson's bourbon finished in a cognac cask. Hey, Octavio and April and Susan and Jerry and Paula. Hey, Marianne over on YouTube and Cindy and Nancy. Hey, Nomi. Hey, Chuck. Hey, Jean, Maureen, Michelle, and Jeanette. Welcome back, Michelle. Hey, Dana. Hey, Mary. Mary, I know you know that song. Hey, Amy Tomler, who recently dedicated all of his works to the public domain. Hey, Paula. Hey, Trish. Hey, Amy. Hey, Jacqueline. Hey, Dad. Glad to see you out there in the Barrier Islands. Hey, MJ. Hey, Mary. Hey, Matthew. Hey, Lori. Next week, of course, will be a time travel pub crawl, the Summer Tiki edition. Hey, Martin. Hey, Laura. Hey, Jean. Hey, Maria. Hey, Linda. Hey, Gina. Hey, Aaron. Hey, Gary. Hey, Linda in Boston. Hey, Gene, if I'm allowed to stay without being mature, we all are. Hey, Beth. Hey, Mika. Hey, Marie. Hey, Paula in Texas and Sarah M. Franklin. Welcome, everybody. Hey, Karen and Hal. Welcome back, Hal. Hey, Miguel in the Irish Bar. Hey, Cindy in good old Rocky Top, Tennessee. Hey, Jenna. Glad to have you back. Hey, Aviva. Hey, Vivian. It is Thursday, right? I'm suddenly paranoid that maybe it's not Thursday. Hey, Heidi in Catlin, Illinois. Hey, Laura, Katie, Jenny, Brett, Robin, Lisa. Evening, everybody. Hey, Joanne. Good to have everybody along. What's up, Count? Hey, Charles. Hey, Mike and Jake. Hey, Mike, Jake Elwood Blue. Got him. I always trip up over that. Hey, Becky. Glad to hear it, Maria. I'm thinking of coming to New York this summer if I can get some Springsteen tickets. Hey, Katie. Hey, Heather. All a matter of timing. I got a lot of stuff coming up, like filming-wise, but I don't know quite what the schedule is. Hey, Susan. Hey, Sue. Or if I can afford it, honestly. Hey, Bridget. Hey, Christine. Hey, Adam. Everybody seems to have forgotten it was Thursday. It is Thursday, right? I'm just going to check really quick. Okay, yeah, it's Thursday. Hey, Heidi. Hey, Sandy. I've seen Springsteen many times. I've seen the Netflix version of the Broadway show. Marissa, who you all know from the Time Travel Pub Crawls, got to see him the other day. Hey, Samantha. Hey, Marianne over on YouTube. Hey, Randall. Hey, Alicia. Hey, Jennifer. Hey, Mom. Hey, Jeff. Hey, Susan. Well, I know who I'm looking up for tomorrow's Find a Grave Friday already. That's unusual that I already know ahead of time. But I got a meeting right after, so I hope we find him fast. Hey, share. Hey, Mona, welcome along. Hey, Sue. Hey, Mike. You know, I'd especially like to see Springsteen on Broadway, because as great as the E Street Band is, I think he's better without them. Like, if I take the top Springsteen shows I've seen, they've all been great, but the solo tour in 2005 and the Seeger Sessions Band were the best. Hey, Heidi. Hey, Kristen. Hey, Kathy. Hey, Mark. A lot of people on YouTube tonight. More than usual, anyway. Hey, Bridget, Dana, Marley, Belinda, Jan. Yeah, milk and cookies. That's what we're having tonight. My milk is aged in a cognac barrel. Or a cognac cask. Hey, Ann. Hey, Katie. 4-day weekend. Oh. Temp in Chicago tonight is somewhere in the high 60s. It's really nice out. Hey, Vicky. I've gotten back on my walking schedule. For the longest time, I wasn't getting my steps in. Now I'm getting up at 5 to go get my steps in again. Marcia, congrats on the soberversary, too. And Sandy, I am drinking some Jepson's bourbon finished in a cognac cask. It is delicious. Hey, Jordana. John, you can keep the hundreds. That extra 30 degrees I just can't deal with, man. Hey, Sandy. I'm glad we got some designated drivers tonight. Everybody, make sure you're on the Mysterious Chicago Regulars and Miles fan club group. The Mysterian Con is coming up first weekend of October. This weekend, the Effing Collective is having a barbecue where we will talk out what the schedule is going to be and what we plan to do. Hey, Corey. Eden, Emily. Oh yeah, I got my smoking jacket on. Despite the fact that Miles keeps thinking it's a toy to chase. Partly because the belt on it is very dangly. Hey, Bob. Thanks for hitting the PayPal already, Gina. Evening, Georgie. Hey, Jackie. Hey, Dave and Barb. And evening, George Pullman. Oh yeah, I've been taking out my frustrations at Graceland on somebody else's grave, so you got it easy. Over on Twitter, it's starting to pick up steam, the idea that we should be renaming the school in Bronzeville that is named after Melville W. Fuller. Hey, Crit. Hey, Nancy. Hey, Susan. Spotted Cow. I feel like I know that drink. Chris, got your power on. Good. Hey, Jim.
For the words, we turn on now to next tune. Earl Father Hines gives us a bit of jive under the general heading of So Help Me.
Earl Father Hines gives us a bit of jive under the general heading of So Help Me. Love that. Evening, Jay. Hey, Jim. Now, Mandy, are these all Wisconsin drinks, besides the brandy old-fashioned? Kevin, thanks for hitting the Venmo. Okay, those sound like very Wisconsin things. Hey, Susie. In Wisconsin. A duck fart shot? I don't know that I want to drink one of those. Hey, Ronald over on YouTube in California. New Glarus or New Glarus? I want to pronounce that New Glarus. This stuff is 59% alcohol. Hey, Dave and Barb. We got a lot of Wisconsinites here, part-time Wisconsinites, or former Wisconsinites, or sometime Wisconsinites. Chicago was pretty nearly in Wisconsin, too. That was a lot closer than people think it was. When Congress first portioned things out, the border was supposed to go down to the southern tip of Lake Michigan. It was only when Illinois was going for statehood that they decided to extend it so we'd be connected to the Great Lakes and not so economically dependent on the South. Because without Chicago and the connection to the Great Lakes, we would have Illinois would effectively be a southern state. And there was quite a thing about that. Even as late as like years after we became a state, there was a movement to let Wisconsin absorb us. Hey, Kate. Hey, Marcia. Maybe I'll put that up on the Patreon soon. Watch down below for the Patreon link if you're not on it already. Mysterious Chicago, the movie, in a town. All right, we'll give Earl Father Hines another minute or so to finish off this song. Hey, Maria in Louisiana by way of Evanston. Okay, Kahlua, Baileys, and whiskey. I can take that. I'd maybe come up with a better name for it. Gary, I think I did, yes. That is something to keep in mind. If you have been on chemo or radiation, watch out. According to some research, the vaccination won't give you as much protection because just in general, your immune system is going to be weakened. So watch out from that. Hope your dad is doing better, Gary. Hey, Christy. Hey, Trish. But in any case, get vaccinated. Evening Sherry in Windsor, Ontario. All right, Earl Father Hines is wrapping up. I think that means that it is time for me to go ahead and get started on this tour. Evening, everybody. Welcome again to Mysterious Chicago, tonight on Mysterious Chicago After Hours. I'm Adam Seltzer. Tonight my guests include notable shit-taker, Abraham Lincoln, testicle wunter, Harold Fowler McCormick, testicle haver, Eddie Brislane, and testicle stealers, accused, Leopold and Loeb. So welcome along, everybody, to Mysterious Chicago After Hours. I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for about 15 years now. Got about a dozen Chicago history books out, not to mention such books as How to Get Suspended and Influence People, which was nearly banned in Utah for its gratuitous use of the word ass. They wouldn't let me call the Smart Alex Guide the Smart Ass Guide to American History, but that's what it was. But of course, there's also H.H. Holmes' The True History of the White City Devil, The Ghosts of Lincoln, which was an attempt to trace all those stories about him pooping in hats and haunting the White House back to their original sources. And this research leads me to do things like flicking off statues of Jefferson Davis, flicking off Alexander Stevens. I flicked off Robert E. Lee too, but that statue is gone, so we'll give that one a rest, I suppose. But in any case, I talk about this sort of thing on the History Channel and the Travel Channel pretty regularly, so I am, after all, incredibly famous. You should definitely pay attention to whatever I say. I think we've established that we're being super classy tonight, so I can probably turn off the cool jazz music. But welcome along. Tonight is Mysterious Chicago After Hours. Mysterious Chicago After Hours, we tell some of the stories that come up in research, but I can't usually tell on the tours because they're too risque. Or I'll come up with jokes that involve swear words, so I can't usually say those on tours, because even though I'm not operating under any corporate office, I can swear if I feel like it on tours. Over on Effing Chicago, we actually advertise that we're going to. Typically on Mysterious Chicago, I try to keep things reasonably family-friendly, but there's certain times you just can't help it. And one of those is in cemeteries, there is often what I call the seventh grade effect. Now, in a cemetery, you are surrounded by all of these reminders of mortality. And these eventually start making you think that someday you are going to die. And your brain kind of kicks in with your inner 7th grader, and as a defense mechanism, you start thinking things are funny. You start thinking all these names like Fanny and Johnson are absolutely hilarious. Now, this got me some complaints in Atlas Obscura for pointing this out, but this one particular cemetery, in fact, is, well, we'll start out with pharmacy owner by the name of Father John Butts. His name was John Butts, but the gravestone says Father John. Love that. Father John Butts, son Joseph Butts. I like the Berenstein Butts. Wife Minnie Butts. Minnie Butts. And at Graceland, in fact, there is, not only are there many Fannys and Johnsons, but there is, in fact, even a Fanny Johnson. But nothing compares to the 7th grade section at this particular cemetery that probably doesn't want me naming them, but we'll be doing a tour there pretty soon. First of all, you've got A.B. Dick, an inventor of the mimeograph. I have had nuns crack up at A.B. Dick. It'd be especially funny if his first name was Anita. Invented the mimeograph, though nobody bought it until they got Thomas Edison to put his name on it. It's kind of like how George Foreman didn't invent the George Foreman grill. But right next to him is a famous elocutionist named Robert Cumnock. Elocutionist means he was a cunning linguist. Off in the distance, you can see the globe for Cumming Cherry, a geologist. And here we were just talking about Wisconsin's attempt to absorb Chicago. One of the guys who put a stop to that was Long John Wentworth, who was in Congress at the time and was apparently offered a slot as the senator if Wisconsin became a state if he backed their push. But he turned it down because he thought it might mess up the railroad deals. Anyway, his name was Long John Wentworth. And I do say on tours a lot, I don't really think that it's a coincidence that giant obelisks like Long John's went out of style around the time people became aware of the works of Sigmund Freud. After all, Wentworth specifically wanted the biggest obelisk in the cemetery, if not in the entire state. Many of his early biographies make a great deal about this. When he was on his deathbed, slowly dying, he spent a lot of time designing his own monument. He specifically wanted the biggest one around. They had the devil's own time even getting the thing through the gates after transporting it up on the river the whole time. Now, I gotta wonder now that I look at it, if they could really clean that thing up. It was probably solid gray when it was first built. Now it's kind of brownish and beige and sepia. But at the time, it probably all would have been gray. Graceland has been doing some cleaning on things lately. It's polishing. Just cleaning it. But, of course, it's not just at that cemetery. Over at Graceland itself, one of my favorite ones is up over here. I think I made the film a little too long. We gotta go by some old folks here. But then there's the one we know as the Ffs Grave. If you spend a lot of time on the internet, FFS to you stands for fuck's sake. And here it actually stands for F.F. Spencer, this guy with the epic mustache, who was a hardware store dealer. But I just love that. It's a great one for days when things are just rough, like when the best news of the day is that Donald Rumsfeld is dead, and then every other piece of news sucks. FFS. But sometimes even the stories behind them are a little more risque. Like, for instance, we've got this one over here. I've featured this one on the Relics of the Old City Cemetery tour. This must have been one of the showpieces of the Old City Cemetery. It's an 1849 grave. That means it was added from about 12 years before Graceland even existed. This would have been in the Old City Cemetery where Lincoln Park is now, before being moved. It's a woman by the name of Jeanette Coe, died 1849. That was presumably the cholera wave, and we'll talk more about cholera later on. But right next to her is her husband, Dr. M.D. Coe, who was prescribing medical marijuana years back before it was cool. Dr. Coe, what little we know of him is that he was quoted at a conference one time saying that he had been seeing a woman who had come to him for hysterical urination. Every time even the slightest pressure, like putting on a dress, was exerted over her bladder, she would urinate. So in a typical 19th century doctor, he prescribed it as hysteria and cured it using cannabis. Very early adoption of medical marijuana. Well, let's move on to one with a bigger story than this. This is one of them that I wasn't sure quite how much to work into the Graceland Cemetery book that I've been working on. This is one of the saddest gravestones in the cemetery. It just says Mama's Grave. This Gothic marker for the Carter family was one of the first ones added to the cemetery right after it was built. Mr. James Carter was a businessman. By the time of the 1860 census, his occupation on the census was just listed as gent. But the grave was for his wife, Helen Carter. And here's a picture of Helen Carter, the mama of Mama's Grave, with her young son, Leslie Carter. Leslie Carter grew up to be famous for trying to get blowjobs. And so we'll move down just a little bit here to Leslie. Now, Leslie grew up to be a lawyer and was married to a woman by the name of Carolyn, who eventually sued him for divorce. The divorce trial became really messy, and not only messy, but national news. Newspapers all over the country covered this trial in great detail. He accused her of cheating on him, and she accused him of improper behavior. In particular, there was one incident they spoke of a lot that he frequently requested, though never received, what newspapers described as a crime against nature or an unnatural act. If you read between the lines a little bit, you can kind of see what he was asking for was a blowjob. Now, one story that particularly emerged is the story of the wedding night when they got to the hotel room and she appeared as though she didn't know what was going to happen in the hotel room, announced that she was too tired to do anything like that, at which point he suggested that why don't we just do it the French way? Then he explained what that meant and spent the rest of the night explaining to her, no, I mean in France, women of all classes do things like that. Now, the trial ended up in his favor. They ruled that he did not have to pay her alimony or anything. Newspapers were really awful in this, saying things like, well, the very fact that she would speak about this in court proves that she must have been an immoral woman, even though she had begged not to have to talk about it, and the judge insisted that she did. So the judge ruled the divorce was granted, but she didn't get any alimony, and she appears to have decided to make her revenge by making Leslie Carter's name famous. She parlayed her fame into a stage career under the name Mrs. Leslie Carter. Now, she started out just on the local stages, but then ended up going on to Broadway, where she was a big hit. Then she was in silent films, and her career lasted half a century. Long after her ex-husband was dead, she was still being Mrs. Leslie Carter, playing old lady roles in westerns. And there were several similar things like this later on. One thing we've talked about in like the Shooting Showgirls, another person who tried to go on stage was Peaches Browning, who was about 15 when she married this old man. Now, in the 1920s, in their divorce proceedings, the newspapers used the same thing, saying like he frequently requested an unnatural act. Though in his case, the unnatural act was eating breakfast naked, which she refused to do, but he did all the time, and she was righteously freaked out by such a thing. And again, the marriage at the time, even at the time, the fact that she was in her only about 15, by the 1920s, that was starting to weird people out a lot more than it would have done back in the days of the Carters. But moving on just a few more years, we get to one of the best stories in the whole cemetery. This is the Medill family. Joseph Medill was the editor of the Chicago Tribune, was only too happy to take all of the credit for getting Abraham Lincoln elected president. His endorsement was critical. But over along the side, we've got his granddaughter. Now, first of all, one of his daughters is in the plot, too. One of his daughters had the best last words of anybody in the cemetery. According to a biographer, she was watching a maid walk away, and with her last breath, she said, "My God, what a bottom." But right there beside her was Eleanor Medill Patterson, better known as Sissy Patterson, also known occasionally as the Battling Countess of Newspaper Row. When she was a young woman, she married a count, then had to go to the president to push through a divorce. Getting a divorce was difficult in those days to begin with, and when you were married to somebody in Europe, that much more so. The count kidnapped their daughter. She had to kidnap the daughter back, essentially. But then she got involved in writing novels, many of which were thinly veiled attacks on her old friend Alice Roosevelt, eventually became the editor of a newspaper, one of the first women to do so, and was known as perhaps the most powerful and most hated woman in America. Now, most biographers, though, kind of gloss over her politics, which in fairness were absolutely awful, but they tend to spend more time talking about her love life. A recent biography estimated that she had about 200 lovers, mostly men, but not all of them, including her son-in-law. The daughter that was kidnapped by the Count publicly divorced her long before you started hearing stories about kids divorcing their parents. So, perhaps the most famous story of her is how her friendship with Alice Roosevelt finally ended. She and Alice were involved in a love triangle with a member of Congress. Alice was engaged to the guy. But one day, after Sissy slept with the guy, Alice showed up to Sissy's rooms and held up a hairpin and said, "I found this in bed. I believe this is yours." Whereupon Sissy reportedly replied, "Did you check the chandelier? I can't find my panties." Gotta give her credit for the burn there. And we'll also cover just briefly is her house is the house where she grew up is still standing, or the house where she was a young girl up to the time of her big debutante party, which everybody had in those days. This is her house, which later became a school known as a school for the worst kids in the city called the Bateman School. But this was the old Patterson McCormick mansion. You see it says on the plaque here, originally built in 1891 for Eleanor Sissy Patterson by architect Stanford White. Now, this was not built for her, it was built for her mother. Eleanor Sissy Patterson was like 9-10 years old at the time, but building houses for 9 or 10-year-old girls would have been par for the course for Stanford White, who more famously assaulted Evelyn Nesbit, leading her husband to shoot Stanford White to death at Madison Square Garden some years later. And this all comes up sometimes on the Bad Boys of Architecture, the Villains of Architecture tour, where we talk about, well, something I've pointed out occasionally is that architects in the early 20th century were great rivals for rock stars from the 70s when it comes to pure debauchery. There was the famous incident of the Pie Girl dinner where Stanford White and several other architects watched a thinly clad teenage girl, or not clad at all, depending on which version of the story, climb out of a pie with several birds. Ernest Graham of Graham Anderson Probst and White had a long-running affair with a woman named Alma Anderson that he had to pay off handsomely. Frank Lloyd Wright has all kinds of different stories about affairs, which makes it especially funny. The Emil Bach House up here in Rogers Park has a plaque out in front of it saying that it reflected how much Frank Lloyd Wright valued family life for other people. But, alright, that's enough sex for 1 minute. We'll get back to it, I'm sure. But let's, first of all, let's swing by the zoo. Now, at the zoo, this is the crane fountain by Augusta St. Gaudens, who was also at the Pie Girl dinner. Now, they let me show this when I was doing Lincoln Park history tours for the zoo over the summer, despite the fact that these, other than the fact that they had fishtails, these boys in the statue are anatomically correct. Now, even though they specifically made me take out one story of the Lincoln Park history tours, that was the story of the sphinxes that used to stand at the entrance to Lincoln Park. Back in the 1890s, there were these 2 sphinx statues that were the cause of some controversy because they had nipples. Eventually, they disappeared from the park. They ended up on display at the guy who commissioned them's mansion out in California. Then they just disappeared completely. They made me take out all references to nipples, or even to show this picture at this with the zoo. But they did let me show the fish boy penises. So, take of that what you will. Now, one of the things that came up in research, one of my favorite stories that I found while I was coming up with interesting things to talk about on the haunted history tours that I do for the zoo, which I'll be starting up again in October, is the story of Sweet William. Now, in the 1950s, one of the biggest TV shows for kids in Chicago was a puppet show, Kukla, Fran, and Ollie. Very regularly, they would have Marlin Perkins from the Lincoln Park Zoo come out there. And one day in 1950, very early on in the television age, they invited Marlin Perkins out there to plug a Halloween party that was coming up. He was supposed to bring a chimpanzee, but the chimpanzee had stage fright or something, so instead he brought along a skunk named Sweet William. Now, Sweet William had an operation. It wasn't capable of spraying stench, except in the way that every animal is capable of spraying some stench. So this led to this scene. I was really glad to be able to find a clip of this. See, there's Sweet William the skunk. Puts it up there, lifts the tail, and boom! Ladies and gentlemen, the first televised dump. You can see when she notices. And of course, this was all filmed live. They just had to kind of improvise. And he said, well, you just never know what a skunk is going to do you? This was actually national news at the time. This was one of the newspapers after the mishap on the Kukra, Fran, and Ollie program recently involving the pet skunk from the Lincoln Park Zoo. All prospective animal guests on television programs henceforth will be screened for subversive activities. People thought this was hilarious, and at the Halloween party in question, Sweet William was brought in wearing a diaper, which again, people loved. This was news all over the place. We have a lot of firsts in Chicago. We have the first use of fingerprints to convict somebody of murder, the first use of handwriting analysis to get somebody acquitted of murder, and the first televised poop. But of course, we have a history of poop stories going way back in Illinois. Well, really, the one about Lincoln comes from Kentucky. When Lincoln was a young boy, his best friend was a kid named Austin Gollaher. Now, this was back in Kentucky when he was really just a toddler. Austin Gollaher has a couple of photos going around. So, Lincoln's first real biography was written by Herndon, his law partner. And Herndon collected all the anecdotes he possibly could about Lincoln from practically everybody who had ever known him, including probably some people who really didn't know him as well as they said. And he never spoke to Austin Gollaher directly, but he heard from some people who did know about Austin Gollaher. And one of my favorite stories about him was, according to one of Herndon's sources, while Lincoln was in the White House, a guy from the old neighborhood in Kentucky came to visit him to talk about draft issues. And while he was there, Lincoln, got through the draft stuff, then started asking about all the families that he remembered from the area. Then he mentioned, now what about Austin Gollaher? Is that old fox still alive? I would rather see him than any man living because he played a dirty trick on me, and I want to pay him back. And Austin Gollaher was, in fact, alive, albeit just barely at the time. Well, this is a picture of him like 30 years afterwards. But Austin Gollaher was alive and apparently got the message. But here was Lincoln's story. He said they were out hunting squirrels in the woods, and Austin went to sleep under a tree with his hat down. And Lincoln said, I climbed up the tree and thought I would shit in his hat. But when I let the load drop, he switched hats with me, so my hat caught the whole charge. So here's Lincoln in the White House, just waiting around for news on the war, trying to guide the Union to victory, trying to save the very country. Also, he was plotting to poop in an old man's hat. I love that about Lincoln. Gollaher was still alive at the time, apparently didn't make the trip because he was afraid of riding trains, and also possibly afraid of what he might find in his hat in the morning. But it's hard to know how reliable this is. Again, it's like a second or third hand source, but Herndon collected it years before journalists discovered Austin Gollaher was still alive and living up in the hills someplace. So, it's actually a better source than a lot of first-hand sources about Lincoln that are clearly exaggerating stuff. It's one of those ones I don't know if it's true, but I hope it is, and it does line up with the kind of jokes Abraham Lincoln liked to tell. Not many of his dirty jokes really survive, only a couple of them do. But there was the one of them putting up a picture of George Washington in the bathroom in England because nothing makes an Englishman shit quicker than the sight of George Washington. There was also one that was recorded about something about trying to fuck a cat. That's the exact words, too. But while we're talking about poop, let's talk about cholera. Let's talk about cholera, baby. Let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about Dr. Brainerd, who died of cholera October 66, when everybody was dying of cholera. Now, Chicago had a couple of distinct cholera waves. There was October 1866, there was one in 1854, there was one in 1849, and really, if you find somebody who died October 66 at Graceland, it's probably cholera. In this case, Lizzie Combs, it even very distinctly says, died of cholera right there. Now, at the time, they didn't really know very much about how cholera spread. It was killing people all over the city. In some cases, in the really early waves, a significant portion of the people who lived in the city died in one summer. But they didn't know quite how it spread. They thought it might be exercising too much, overeating, getting diarrhea, getting flatulence. There is this one very interesting thing here. As a general rule to avoid articles of diet that produce flatulence or looseness. This is all in an article about how to avoid cholera. And they were kind of getting there. Really, it's spread by getting infected fecal particles into your mouth, which also leads to the question of whether, in fact, flatulence could spread it. Now, there have been some experiments recently. Somebody wondered if farting in an operating room could contaminate the area. So some tests were done. They had people fart into petri dishes, which seems like they're not possibly controlling all of the variables here. But it turned out that farts don't really spread disease as long as you're wearing underwear. You could theoretically spread cholera by farting on somebody's food if you were farting on somebody's food while bare-assed, but probably you shouldn't be doing that anyway. No, sir. And of course, there's the other guy that I love talking about here. Under the tree is this gorgeous monument. It looks especially good in autumn. You can't really read anything on it. You have to go digging around to find out who it is. But it is a man by the name of Jeremiah Price, who died during the 1854 cholera wave. He was eventually moved over here. He died without writing a will. Everything was tied up for years. Finally, a judge said, okay, you can use some of the money to have his monument and his body moved over to Graceland Cemetery. But in 1854... Jeremiah Price was known as the most boring man in town. He was a wealthy businessman, but as one person later remembered, if he had any imagination at all, it did not extend beyond the alphabet. All he cared about was making money. Then one day he walked into the drugstore and said, "I'm not feeling well." And they said, "Well, what seems to be the problem?" He says, "I have quite a diarrhea." And the pharmacist said to him, "Well, you know," and this was probably Philo Carpenter, come to think of it, but the pharmacist said to him, "You know, Jerry, that's the first sign of cholera. Lots of people are dying of cholera this week. You should really get to a doctor." And cheap old Mr. Price said, No, I will just have some peppermint lozenges, please." So he went home and tried to get some peppermint lozenges to cure his cholera, and was dead the next morning. Now, peppermint lozenges, of course, do not cure cholera. They actually found he had $20,000 in cash strapped to his body, as though he were trying to take it with him. But really, years later, all anybody remembered was how boring the guy was. And this is something you find quite a bit, is all these rich people in the cemetery, all there really is for as far as a biography is just all of their business deals. You can't find anything about what they were like, what they enjoyed, what their hobbies might have been. In Jeremiah Price's case, we can just say there was a man named Jeremiah Price. He made a lot of money, then he ate shit and died. Which is effectively what cholera is. You eat shit and you die. And while we're on the subject, right at the front entrance is Eli B Williams. He's a classic example of a guy that I couldn't find any good anecdotes about at all. He was an early financier in the city. About the best story I could find, really, was the time he and his wife went to Mark Bobine's Sauganash Hotel when they first arrived in the city. But there were too many naked Potawatomi there, so his wife got freaked out and they went someplace else instead. Other than that, the best thing I could find was the story of Louise de Koven Bowen, who in the early 20th century was one of the great social reformers of Chicago. There was even pressure on her to run for mayor decades before we had a woman mayor. But she remembered in her autobiography that when she was a little girl, she used to steal all of Eli B. Williams' gooseberries. Until one day she ate all of the gooseberries and drank a whole bunch of cream and got severe diarrhea. So that is probably the best thing I could find about Eli B. Williams, is he gave Louise de Koven Bowen the scoots. And of course, while we're talking about pooping in cemeteries, let's not forget about the coyotes. These are a few that I have not pictured on the Patreon. Every Wednesday on the Patreon is a coyote photograph from the cemeteries. You can see this one in the background over here. What's amusing to me is just how often they actually pick a really good target. Like we were talking about the McCormicks just this morning. I've seen them hit the McCormicks. One thing I also don't generally share is these pictures of them with their prey. Like here they are absolutely eviscerating a raccoon. And this one carrying a squirrel around. But while we're on the subject of poop, up here in Rogers Park is Eugene Field Elementary School. Eugene Field was known in his day as the poet of childhood. Most famous for his poem Winkin', Blinkin', and Nod, he also wrote a really sad one about a child who died young. It is a really heartbreaking poem. Now, Mr. Field also wrote a humor column for the Chicago Daily News where he made the Saints and Sinners Corner, the Curiosa section of McClurg's bookstore, famous, and all the people who hung out there equally famous. But he was so well respected that we found him for Find a Grave Friday one time. We went out to I can't remember if it was Find a Grave or not. We went out to Kenilworth where he's buried, and it turns out the church has one grave in its courtyard. It's Eugene Field. The guy was given a whole churchyard all to himself. He is also the first person ever known to have used the word poop in both its modern noun and verb forms in print in a collection of 3 poems by Eugene Field. Privately published, he wanted to join this club. To join the club, you had to write a work of erotica or a naughty poem. So he wrote a couple of them, one of which was called Socratic Love. And this was about Socrates and one of his students, who historically is said to have had a crush on Socrates that Socrates did not return, though in Field's version of it, he did. In fact, the last 2 lines of it are using poop in both its modern and noun and verb form, was he packed his semen deep into that colon soft and callow, that whence thereafter Alky pooped, the poop was mostly tallow. You can write like that, still get a whole churchyard to yourself. There's also this one really charming poem that he did about his wife farting while she undressed. It's called On Julia Unlacing Herself. Now let me just take a sip of my cocktail before I read this, where I get my elocution on. Tell if thou canst and truly whence doth came this camphor, storax, spikenard, and galbanum. These musks, these ambers, and those other smells, sweet as the vestry of the oracles, I'll tell thee, well my Julia did unlace her silken bodice, but a breathing space, the passing air such odor then assumed, as when Jove great Juno goes perfumed, whose pure immortal body doth transmit a scent which fills heaven and earth with it. 'Tis when my Julia sheds her hose, that there is wafted to my nose an odor with such spices fraught, that I esteem all others not. And when she belches, what a smell of heliotrope and asphodel! And when my Julia breaks her wind, there issues from her fair behind a breath that would become, I ween, a Pallas or a Paphian queen. No hollow clamor speaks the birth of this ethereal child of earth, but hot and swift it mounts the air, dispensing savor everywhere. Swooning with ecstasy, I kiss the heaven with that breathed this gale of bliss. It's really a very nice thing to write about your wife if you're going to write about her farting. I'm just looking at this plant in line 2, spikenard. There's probably a better way to pronounce that, but I like calling it spikenard. I'm reminded of a kid I heard about. A friend of mine had a unit in class where you had to invent your own cereal and come up with a way to advertise it. And one kid invented a cereal called Nards. Eat 'em. According to the story, another kid made one called Gonads. But I just can't imagine he would really have gotten away with that. But I've re-asked him about it as an adult. Did that really happen? He still insists that it does. But while we're talking about gonads, there have been various strange stories throughout history of people trying to get access to dead bodies after they have been executed. One of my favorites is the story of the vampire of St. Louis, Elizabethmund. Now, every time in the 1863 and 64, every time somebody was hanged in St. Louis, a woman named Elizabethmund would show up. She had some sort of a nerve disorder, what they used to call St. Vitus dance. It's caused a lot of jerking and involuntary dancing. She had it in her head that if she drank the blood of a hanged man, that would cure her disease. It was the kind of story that went around a lot back then. There were all sorts of stories about things you could do with the body of someone who had been hanged that would give you all sorts of powers. But she would apply to get to drink the blood every time. One time they even said, well, the soon-to-be widow's sitting right over there. Why don't you go ask her if you can drink her husband's blood after he's dead? So she went over and asked. It went about as well as you would think. But one day, they told her, no, you definitely can't drink this guy because we're not going to be hanging him after all. They had just gotten word from Abraham Lincoln that the sentence had been commuted. So without even realizing it, Abraham Lincoln did in fact thwart a vampire one time. But the story that people's dead bodies, glands could be used for something continues into the 20th century. This was a gangster by the name of Eddie Brislane. When he was hanged in Chicago in the late 1910s, somebody actually a chef here in Chicago, Otto Trobak, went to the police and said, I would like to get his testicles so that I can have them transferred into my scrotum. This was a popular idea that rich people had at the time, richer than chefs in general. People had decided that a man is only as old as his glands. If you could get something more vital transplanted into your body, the testicles of a young man, or in many cases the testicles of a chimpanzee or a goat, then you might actually restore your youth. In fact, well, in this case, some people denied this story. In fact, the chief said, no, we definitely have not been offered $100,000 for this. Well, actually, this was about a month later. There was a story going around that people were getting their testicles stolen from them, but the police said it looks like a wild cock and bull story. I can't believe they printed that in 1922. But there were stories about people getting their glands stolen in the middle of the night. It was very similar to modern stories about people getting their kidneys stolen. But Leopold and Loeb were in fact hauled into court on suspicion that they had been the ones who had stolen one particular guy's testicles one night down in Kensington. So they were brought to court. This was after they had been convicted of the murder of Bobby Franks. And I believe they ended up settling out of court with the guy. The jury couldn't decide one way or the other. It was going to get dragged on for a while. The evidence was kind of against them, but modern historians seem to be a little bit on the fence. Nobody seems really convinced one way or the other whether they were actually involved in this or not. But meanwhile, same time period, Harold Fowler McCormick, whose grave we visited today, left his first wife, Edith Rockefeller McCormick, to marry an opera singer of questionable talents. But apparently at her request, he decided to undergo an operation to have his vigor restored and had some testicles implanted into his body. The common story in the papers was that it was testicles that he bought from a hobo on West Madison Street who looked sufficiently healthy. Though the surgeon involved admitted there had been an operation, but alternately insisted that no human tissue was used and no animal tissue was used. It was one or the other, anyway. McCormick ended up going through the operation twice, once at the beginning of his second marriage and once at the end of his second marriage, but it wasn't enough to keep the marriage afloat. Also, he did not live to be 100 years old like he thought he would by having these operations done. He lived to be 69. Nice. Well, we can't really talk about after-hours stuff without going to check out a couple of the local brothels. Now, our first real red light district in Chicago was right where River North is now, just above the loop, on the other side of the river. There was a neighborhood there called the Sands, which Long John Wentworth once eventually just bought up all of the buildings and tore them all down. Decidedly the vilest and most dangerous place in Chicago is, or rather was, the locality in the North Division near the lakeshore known as the Sands. For some years past it has been the resort and hiding place of all sorts of criminals, while the most wretched and degraded women and their miserable pimps congregated there in large numbers. A large number of persons, mostly strangers to the city, has been enticed to the dens there and robbed, and there is but little doubt that a number of murders have been committed by the desperate characters who made those dens their home. The beastly sensuality and the darkest crimes had their resorts there. You see where this is going. Eventually, Long John Wentworth just tore the whole place down. But by the early 20th century, the big place to go was the Levee. Down on the south side, around what is now Cermak, 21st, Cullerton, that's 20th. In particular, right here, perhaps the most famous, standing on the spot where these buildings by Bertrand Goldberg now stand, was the Everleigh Club, the fanciest brothel in town. This was the kind of brothel that had more than one of its own orchestra, that had a professional piano player, that had a library, though one patron famously said that was educating the wrong end. Now, the rooms looked about like this. If you paid less than $50 a night there, you would be asked never to come back. That's $50 in early 20th century money. You're looking at, it was the equivalent of over $1,000 a night in today's money. But the workers there were very well paid and very well taken care of. They got medical coverage and everything, much more so than a person would have expected at the time. Right across the street from them was Vicshaws Resort. Vicshaws kept on operating long after the levee district was closed down and everybody was shut out. Vicshaws just moved on and kept on operating out of a different address nearby. But this place was so well frequented and well circulated and so well known in the early 20th century that they even published guidebooks to it. They called them the Sporting and Clubhouse Directory. Now, in particular, though, going back to that unnatural act we talked about back at the beginning, there is this place, French houses. The French house, these following are French, and we know what that means because we already talked about Leslie Carter. The prices range from $1 on up. We can say nothing in regard to them except that in a general way they are safe. Everybody knows what a French house is, just as well as everybody knows where the shamrock grows, and we need offer no further explanation. Now, in case you're shopping, these were all on 4th Avenue, which would be Federal Avenue now. This would have been just the southern portion of the loop, a little bit above the actual levee district. But of course, we all know what a French house is because we've talked about Leslie Carter already. Now let's cover a little bit about one other story that got me in trouble over the years running the tours. One common joke that we all told was the Biograph Theater. This was where John Dillinger saw his last movie. He came out of here and noticed that the bad guys were, the FBI, the good guys really, were out there, ran into this alley where he was shot to death. We used to take people out there quite a bit. I would stand in front of, right nowadays there's a Dillinger mural there that's been painted by the Chicago Crime Tours Company. There used to be this picture of a guy who had 6 fingers on one hand. So I would stand there for a second, then turn around and say, "Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die." But after Dillinger was shot, his body was taken to a morgue. We have been to the morgue a couple of times on the morning mini tours, where this picture was taken. That's his arm under the sheet. But it does look for all the world like Dillinger is awfully happy to be there on the slab. This led to the legend of Dillinger's ding-a-ling. For about once a month, they say at the Smithsonian, somebody asked if it's true that they've got John Dillinger's preserved penis in there someplace. And when I was doing the tours, I would say, well, look at the guy. If the guy ever got excited, he would probably die of blood loss to the brain. Then I'd turn to Willie, the driver. I don't know, Willie, is that a problem? He'd be like, "Oh, no, you just get a bit dizzy, that's all." And somebody wrote in to complain about that. Meanwhile, Ken, the other tour guide at the time, was doing puppetry of the penis tricks in the middle of tours. That's where you pull your junk out and fold it into shapes like the Loch Ness Monster or eggs over easy. I'm the one who gets in trouble for that joke. All right, we're running low on time here, but I promised you guys I would cover the full swear word edition of the story of Odin Tattoo. This is a tattoo parlor built into an old funeral home. Now, they told me we were going to investigate this as a haunted place. I said, let me guess, this is a bunch of guys on drugs. And they said, oh yeah, there's some of that going on. And indeed, the first person we talked to said, oh yeah, man, I was in the basement. I heard a ghost go, woo. Like, okay, this guy watches too much Scooby-Doo. We can hang sometime, but I'm not believing his ghost stories. But then this guy, we talked to the owner, which was a guy by the name of Tapeworm. And Tapeworm had much better stories. They didn't just sound like the ones that people make up when they tell us what they think we want to hear. He talked about a guy in a brown suit who would watch him while he was tattooing, a guy in a powder blue suit that he'd see walking around every now and then. But then, and this is where I usually have to clean up the story quite a bit, is he pointed over at the staircase that led from the tattoo parlor section up to his apartment. And normally I clean up the language here, but tonight it's after hours, so I won't. He said, you see them fucking stairs? Twice I've been walking down those fucking stairs and I felt like somebody was trying to fucking push me. Like push me down the stairs, right? And that freaked me the fuck out because everybody knows you can't fight back with these cats. So first time it happened, I just looked up, I went, listen motherfucker. If I fucking die in this fucking place, it is fucking on. Tapeworm. 3 weeks later, Tapeworm did die in the place. He had a heart attack up in his apartment. And after that, I told people if there's ever been one ghost that I had no doubts about, it's the ghost of Tapeworm. I would go into that place and feel like somebody flicking my ear, pulling my hair. People who worked there said that they were, one guy got a missed call on his cell phone from Tapeworm's old phone number on Halloween night. Other people said that only Tapeworm's friends could ever get the equipment at Tapeworm's old station to work, and others said that nothing worked right if they were playing techno music in the store. Tapeworm hated techno music. If you wanted the stuff to work right, you had to play metal. You got it, Tapeworm. And if Tapeworm is there trying to beat up on whatever ghosts were there before, man, Tapeworm versus some guy in a powder blue suit, my money's on Tapeworm. But alright, everybody. So, want to go ahead and plug some of the upcoming events here. Saturday night, at 6 p.m., we've got an H.H. Holmes walking tour downtown. That one is sold out. But right afterwards, we will hightail it on back to Point A to do the 8 p.m. Ghost Tour. And that one still has a few tickets available. Go to MysteriousChicago.com or the events page over here on Facebook. That'll link you up to everything. Then next Thursday, we are bringing back the Tiki edition of the Time Travel Pub Crawl. If anybody out there is new here, when we started doing virtual tours, I thought a pub crawl would be fun. And since it's virtual, we can go anywhere in time or space. Last year we had a great time going to historical tiki bars in the summer, so we're going to bring that one back again. We'll have some entertainment. We'll have some fun drink recipes. Those are in the event description already if you want to play along. So Time Travel Pub Crawl is back on Thursday, a week from today. And the day after that, Saturday is in-person day. The next Saturday tour will be back at Graceland Cemetery. That is July 10th, 11 a.m. Tickets on sale now at MysteriousChicago.com. Now, should you need any Mysterious Chicago apparel or coffee mugs, hoodies, t-shirts, etc., go to cafepress.com/MysteriousChicago. That'll hook you up with everything, including shirts for the Dead Ringers, the barbershop quartet that keeps on turning up on the Time Travel Pub Crawls. So that's all, once again, cafepress.com/MysteriousChicago. And with that, everybody, I will put Earl Father Hines back on, and we will just hang out here like we always do. Thanks for joining me for Mysterious Chicago After Hours. I'm Adam Seltzer for Mysterious Chicago Tours. Let's hang out. Thank you, Lori. Thanks, Margaret. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, everybody who showed up tonight. Audrey, yeah, if you are on the ticket tier of the Patreon, just send me an email. I'm going to set up a special email for ticket requests so I don't lose them. But yeah, any walking tour that I run the ticketing on, you can. Ellen, that's awesome. See you there. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Nicole, Emily, and Katie. Hey, Katie, you can go ahead and type out the whole word there. It's all right. Hey, Jordana. Hey, Carolyn. Thanks, Chuck and Jeanette. This is really delicious bourbon. If I ever do an in-person time travel pub crawl, yes, Eli will have to clone himself. Pat, it was a gas, thanks. Gary, sorry to hear that. Thanks for coming out tonight. Miles is around. Miles, I had everything set up to chase Miles around. Hey, Ariel on YouTube. We're just in the post-tour hangout right now. Oh, American Ripper was on today. Hey, Solange. Mona, yeah, I knew Tapeworm's real name was Richie Herrera. I don't know where his grave is, though. Thank you, Ronald. Yeah, we'll find Miles in a second. Miles, you see, this smoking jacket includes this long tasseled belt. It's really hard to wear this thing around Miles because he sees these tassels and wants to chase them. He was being very playful this evening. I don't know where he went now, but he's been chasing... If I was too busy typing to play, he would chase his tail for a minute. Thanks, Denise. Ariel, the delicious bourbon is a new Jepson single barrel bourbon offering. Same guys who make Malort. They also make really good bourbon. This is one that was finished in a cognac cask. Okay, you got it. Thanks, Marita. A smoking jacket from Richard's Fabulous Finds here in Chicago, the best men's vintage store I've ever been to. You can't find good vintage menswear that often. All right, let me find where the Miles cat is. Oh, he's right here. Miles, you want to come hang? Are you trying to get in with Ronnie there?
Loud and Roy Harris, the words we turn on now to next two. Earl Father Hines gives us a bit of jive under the general heading of So Help Me.
Miles has been sitting right outside the bedroom door. Hey, Miles. Hey, David, you missed really the whole tour. But now we're just hanging out in the post-tour hang. You got Miles out here. Have a good night, Mandy. Sarah, I saw that very joke on America's Funniest People 30 years ago, and I'm still telling it. Donna, my favorite donut that stands is the peanut butter pocket. As soon as I took a bite, I had no desire ever to eat any other donuts besides that one ever again. Miles was driving me nuts as I tried to do this. As soon as I put the smoking jacket on, he wants to chase it. Hey, Miles, want to chase something? Here you go. There you go. You're the cat dancer, the Layla from Effing Got Him. He does in fact dance with it. My favorite pie from Hoosier Mama? I like a lot of them. The coconut custard is a particularly good one. Thanks, no one on YouTube. Yeah, when they have the coconut custard at Hoosier Mama, I especially love that one. But really, that raspberry pear balsamic at first slice is hard to beat. I keep going back to Hoosier Mama, partly because you never know what they're going to have next. First slice is awesome, but it's a more predictable selection. Smoking jacket for Gads. Oh, he would probably wear that, too. He's still back here chasing this thing. He'll chase it and he'll pick it up and bring it to me when he wants to play. Eleanor, they do coffin races in Forest Park. In fact, let me see if I've got my my coffin race video here that I took in Forest Park one time.
Earl Father Hines and his orchestra, so now it can be told it's reaching you from the new Grand Terrace on Chicago's south side, where the couples are gaily dancing here in the cool atmosphere to this jive of
Yeah, I do. Hang on. Yeah, every year in Forest Park, home of Forest Home Cemetery, where the dead outnumber the living, they do a thing called coffin races, where people come in costume, build their own motorized coffin, and have races. And here's one time. I'd filmed this in slow-mo. Abraham Lincoln. Do 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 do. That's all out in Forest Park. In the first layer of suburbs to the west. Oh wait, was there still audio on that thing? Oh yeah, there probably was. It's all slowed down. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. I remember they lost. Lobster pizza is good, says Phoenix. I would try it. Mysterious Chicago the musical. I'm down. I actually had Roger Ebert's tacit permission to write Roger Ebert the musical. I went and asked him about it at a book signing. I got this idea for Ebert the musical. It would open with his father singing a song called "No Son of Mine is Going to Do That with His Thumb." Never really got off the ground. That's like the Ebert! Exclamation point. The musical. Well, yeah, after you foil the plot of Elizabethmund, the Vampire of St. Louis, you gotta run. Jeanette, yeah, I remember when Siskel and Ebert were on The Critic, and I showed the picture of when they went trick-or-treating as Bert and Ernie. You're Satan, aren't you? And they got a statue of Ebert outside of a theater in Champaign where Aiden and I went to see Weird Al a few years back. And Ebert just ripped on Al's movie UHF. He, like, criticized everything up to and including Al's posture. And so Al opened the show that night with UHF, the theme from. And then there's a picture of him sitting on the same bench going like, even after all these years. Sandy, my ice cubes are frozen, reusable Mickey Mouse ice cubes. It's very classy. Have a good night, Eleanor. Yeah, these frozen reusable ones, they'll get your drink cold, but they don't water it down. I love that. And honestly, they work a little better than the rocks. I like the rocks too, but the rocks, frankly, are cooler than more cool than functional. The purple thing is also a Mickey Mouse frozen reusable ice cube. Gary, I've been to DC just to work with school groups, really. Boston, I have not. I know Mandy's done some ghost tours in those cities. I think in Boston. I did a whole thing for my Abraham Lincoln that I did as much research as I could on White House ghosts. And there are definitely, people don't like to go on record about this, but there are definitely people who work in the White House who take the ghost stories very, very seriously. No matter how many of them seem to have been invented by Harry Truman. Deanie, yeah, I'll see if I can figure out what the settings is. I won't be able to fix it right now. But it might just be like 5 minutes after the thing ends, it'll all be up there on the videos page. Susan, I've never worked in Philadelphia. I've been there a couple of times. As Tom Waits said in the 70s, every now and then you just got to go to Philadelphia. That's all there is to it. You just got to do it. I do end up there now and then, but usually just for concerts. Thanks, Tanya and Janet.
And down the groove now, we rather imagine you'll hear that famous 7 brass of Earl Hines in...
You know, the Game Art in Boys Town used to have a great Doctor Who selection. And that was the place to go for action figures when, especially when Doctor Who figures were a thing. They were hard to find in this city. Evening, Bill. If anybody's just joining us, the tour was at 8 p.m. Central. So now we're just kind of in the post-tour hang. Carol, yes, I have been to the Lincoln Museum in Springfield. Thank you, Susan. Have a good night. Why was Eugene Field so popular? Well, for one thing, the Wink and Blink and the Nod poem was a huge hit. His humor columns were a big hit in the Daily News. He also had a couple of poems about dying children that were really heartbreaking and hugely anthologized at the time. They're always testing flying cars, I see in the comments. So the thing is, has your car ever stalled? Do you know what happens when your flying car stalls? Thank you, Kelly. And Dana, thank you. Thank you, David. Thanks, Ann, for the Venmo. Now and then I notice the, now and then I'll notice the alert. There's a great urban legend that the parking garage at Marina City was designed for flying cars. I doubt that it's true, but I love the story. Trish, I hope so. Thanks for buying the tickets, Judy. I'll see you there. Okay, down to 1 for Saturday. There's a little bit of leeway with walking tours. So if anybody on the Patreon tries, I can still hook you up if you're on the ticket tier. Carol, I believe they prefer the term UAP now. And I spent my teens and early 20s driving cars that stalled about every time you came to a stop sign, so flying cars I'm rather skeptical about. Thanks, Lori. Kristen and Catherine, don't worry, there'll be plenty of other Saturdays to come. I think the Saturday after that I'm going to do Rose Hill. I haven't really dared to do that since I got in trouble there for dancing on the grave of Wilbur F. Story. Apparently people are writing to them and saying I'm teaching critical race theory on the tours. Which isn't untrue, exactly. And I'm not teaching graduate level sociology or law, but... Dave, you know, I cover Mount Carmel a lot on the True Crime and Cemeteries tour. Queen of Heaven, most of the interesting graves that I know of are in the mausoleum, which is harder to film. But yeah, it probably is time I do just a full Mount Carmel one. Thanks, Megan. Audrey, there'll be plenty of Ghost Tour ones coming up. Catherine, I might just... I promised them that I wouldn't. Maybe I'll just invite others to do so. Jacqueline. Well, I got to hit that one in Aurora that I know that you were hitting. And I keep feeling like I've got a big article about to go up on the blog early next week about the Big Thunder grave out in Belvedere that I've been covering on the Patreon the last couple of days. Laura, I'll have to check about doing a walking tour there. It's kind of a trick because it's a big one. There's the two graves that you most need to hit on a Mount Carmel tour are on opposite ends of the cemetery, the Italian Bride and Al Capone. So I have to work at it a little bit. But it's also the Catholic cemeteries, I don't know whether they'd let me or not. I'd have to check with the archdiocese or something. How late in the year do I do walking tours? Usually until they stop selling, which is typically sometime in November. Sandra, I definitely haven't announced next May yet, but I assume so as long as I'm in town. Often in the spring I'm traveling around with school groups, which can complicate things a little bit. I gotta rewind the Earl. Bohemian National, I just about get to where I can do one of those. I hear you, Bat. Catherine, definitely. I'm definitely planning to hit that one pretty soon. Cindy and Marshall, we have quite a few TARDIS accessories floating around our house. Somebody just asked me about a bakery tour, but I've never done food tours before. It's a whole other skill set. It's a whole other organizational thing. I need to email that person back. Hey, but that sounds like very good wine. I'm glad you're enjoying the book, whichever one it is. Yes, tomorrow morning will be Find a Grave Friday. I know what I'm looking for tomorrow. But it might be kind of a difficult one because I'll be stunned if there's a picture of it or any good data online. But it should be findable. It's a cemetery we haven't used in a long time.
Tune titled, melodically, A Little Kid.
Have a good vacation, Mona. About as much as I can give you for hints. It's one we haven't used in a long time. Why are pies so important in Chicago? I don't know if they are. They're just important around here. I've got one like interview / audition thing coming up where I'm supposed to talk about something I'm passionate about. And I should probably talk about history stuff. But I'm also really tempted to say pie. It's like pie. I'm terrible at baking them, but I love to eat them. I love finding the pie shops around town. We got a pretty good handful of pie shops around here. Alright, see you, Sandy, for Tiki Time next week. And there won't be I'll probably do a morning mini tour on Sunday, but we won't be doing a full-length tour this Sunday. I know I can't really compete with 4th of July stuff. I could kind of use a bit of a break. Catherine, thanks. I'll let Ronnie know. Best pie for the 4th of July. Well, apple pie is American as, so goes the proverb. Or the simile. Laura, fireworks do not seem to bother Miles. We get plenty of them in the neighborhood. But he kind of takes them in stride. What bothers him is hearing that cat who's always having sex outside. She's pretty obnoxious. Now, when I was in Iowa, I stopped in the Amana colonies for pie, and there was a pie shop that had a lot of really good-looking pies. But they were also selling all these right-wing books, and then I didn't want to buy their pie anymore. I don't know I don't know what freaks Miles out so much about hearing the cat just howling outside. Miles, you want a hovercraft ride? Yeah, let's take a ride. Miles is taking a box ride in his hovercraft. Let's go for a trip on our favorite rocket ship. He doesn't seem to like this quite as much as he did when he was little. When he used to fit in Trader Joe's bags and I could swing him around. He loved that. Judy, Miles is fixed, so I doubt it. Miles has a flying car. Oh yeah, I hear rhubarb is hard to get down south. We got the grip of rhubarb around here. Now I really want pie. It's too late to go get pie tonight. Have a good night, Jacqueline. I'll see you in the morning.
But here's rhythm and time, Earl Father Hines and the St. Louis Blues.
Judy, that would be oysters. There's probably pie delivery around here. I don't know how good a pie delivery you can get after 9 o'clock. Especially, I don't stay up that late normally. Thanks, Christine. Good night, Jackie. Coconut cream is good. I'm a coconut I don't really know. I don't normally go in for coconut stuff in general, but the coconut custard is something else. You know, that's a good point. Go Puff. There's a Go Puff place like a block from us, so when we order from Go Puff, it's here in like 5 minutes. I've only done it once or twice. Thank you, Teresa. Oh, and Kelly over on Cash App, too. Cash App still works. Blueberry pie, it's hard to beat blueberry pie. There used to be this lollipop called Square Star Shooters. The blueberry one tasted exactly like blueberry pie. The only place I ever knew that had them was the Little League concession stand. 30-some years ago. Good night, Lee. Pie delivery. Let me check GoPuff on that. Alright, GoPuff app. Can you send me pie? Yeah, they can send me various frozen pies. They can send me a frozen key lime, frozen Hershey's, a Beatrix Oh My Caramel. Not a great selection for pie. Or a Little Debbie oatmeal cream pie for $1.49. Hey, Kathleen. Welcome along. Those of you just joining us, of course, we're in the post-tour hang right now. It sounds like Earl Father Hines is wrapping up, which means it's probably time for me to wrap up as well. So everybody, thanks a lot for joining me. Let me go ahead and plug the upcoming tours one more time. That would be Saturday. It sounds like there may be one ticket left for the Ghost Tour. Next Thursday, though, we can have all the people we want here in the Fool Killer Submarine for the Time Travel Pub Crawl Tiki Edition. We will explore the history of this wonderful, kitschy, and highly problematic trend of the mid-20th century. Followed on Saturday by the next Graceland Cemetery in-person tour. Tickets are on sale now. Check MysteriousChicago.com. Check CafePress.com/MysteriousChicago for all of your t-shirt needs. And once again, everybody, thanks a lot for joining me. I'm Adam Salter for Mysterious Chicago Tours, saying, since it's after hours, stay safe, stay fucking awesome, and stay spooky. Have a good night, everybody.